It's lesson 6, part 2. Just before the break, we were trying to figure out how to get our search term to show up here. So we're going to try it this way. We'll just add our dash into the search. So album count, albums in our search term. And Alex suggested in here we just put our dash right in here. That'll work. So we have no search term in our get method in our post, so this value just returns an empty string. Up here it's null. So we'll try it like this. Maybe not the most elegant solution, but if it's functional, good enough for our purposes. So we'll just try it again. So once we search, it shows a dash in the search term here. So that'll work. Thanks, Alex.
Not a problem.
So we've done most of what we want to do with our index view. We'll deal with the price formatting at the end of, towards the end of the class when we make changes to our model. We've basically changed everything we can change through the view and the controller. So this is a significant improvement on what the scaffolding gives us. And this is typically how we'll build our views. We'll use the scaffolding to give us a place to start, but then we're going to have to improve them because the scaffold is limited. Doesn't necessarily give us the best user interface. So we'll come back to this page a bit later just to deal with the currency formatting. We want to deal with our edit view. So the first thing we want to do is I actually have a sample image we can use. So on Blackboard, if you refresh your week 6 folder, down at the bottom here, there's a little zip file that says Music Store Assets. I want you to right click and save that file. Now here's where I would recommend you save it. You can save it anywhere on your computer. Here's typically what I do. With most of my solutions in my root project folder, I usually like to make a folder that I call working. So this is where I put in any files I might get from my customers, like images or documents or things like that. So these are things that aren't necessarily included in the website, but they're files that I might need to work with or manipulate. So I'll typically save that. I find this is useful because many times when our clients give us images, they give us these massive image files. They're 3 or 4 megabytes. They have huge dimensions. We're not going to want to display those images in the size that we get them. We're going to want to shrink them and compress them, but we need to have a copy of the originals. Maybe we get PSDs, Illustrator files, things like that. So it's a good idea to have that stuff somewhere. So once we save that, I guess it would help if I saved it in the right place. Let me save that again. Didn't save it where I wanted to. Here's my project. So we'll save that to our working folder, and then let's extract it. So there are a few files in here that come from the Music Store tutorial that's on Microsoft. And if we open up the content folder, there's an images folder and there's a site.css. So there's a different style sheet from the one we had. So let's copy both of these. So we're in the content folder. And if we go back to our web project folder, let's paste them in here, inside of content. And it will say there's already a site CSS. Do you want to overwrite this? We'll say yes. So it's got some other CSS classes, as well as it has the images. And one of the images is this placeholder. So right now, all of the album art is placeholder image.
Where did you get this from again?
From Blackboard. In the week 6 folder, the last item says music store assets. Download it and extract it.
Oh, okay.
And once you've extracted it, there's a content folder. And inside of content, there's an images subfolder and there's a site.css. So we want to copy these things to the content folder of our web project. And now we'll need to do like we did with our JavaScript. If we scroll back up in Visual Studio and expand our content folder, notice we don't see the images subfolder. We've got to include that in the project. So if I just click on, make sure my Show All Files button is enabled, I may have to refresh it up here, and now I can include the images folder. So this should actually change the CSS. We should get some blues and some oranges coming from that CSS file. But you actually have to hit refresh and you'll notice now the CSS changes. We did lose our little padding up here. My headings being hidden, all this stuff got pushed up to the top. So I think we need to go and just stick that back in. So I'm going to open up site.css and I'll change the body padding here from 0 to 60. I think we did that manually in the site.css a few weeks ago, but we just overwrote that file. So that's line 13 of site.css. Vertical padding. That pushes it back down. So all of the albums in our database, they all have, for the album art URL, they've got this little placeholder cover image. So we want to change our edit view, so when we look up an album, it displays the actual picture rather than the file name. So I'm going to go to my store manager and open up my edit view. And we'll scroll down. And on lines 56 and 57, there's a text box here where the user can type the name of a file. And there's also a validator. We want to get rid of that stuff. So let's delete what's there on lines 56 and 57. This is in the section that says album art URL. So I'm in my store manager edit view. And I remove lines 56 and 57. We can write a little if statement here. So we're going to check the length of the album art URL property. With greater than 0, we've got some value there. if the database has an image, we're going to generate an image tag to display that image. So right now, if we look, all the images, they're all going to be the same. All the records in our database have the placeholder GIF as the album art URL. So we took out what was on lines 56 and 57, and we've added an image tag. But we only want to display the image tag when that field isn't blank. So now if we go back to our store manager and click on any album, it will show us the image. Because if we look in our database, all the records have this file. If I look at everything in my table, notice it's got placeholder.gif for all the albums. And they already include the path/content/images, which isn't really a very efficient way of doing this. If we were going to build it from scratch, we probably wouldn't include the folders because it's all the same. In which case, we'd have to include that /content/images in our image tag. Database already has the full path, so in this case, we can leave it out. So now we also want, somebody said earlier in the class, we should have a browse button here, because maybe we want to replace that image. So above the image, let's put in an input type equals file. And let's give it a name of album art URL. So it's important the name of that box matches the name of the column in the database exactly. I'll show you why in a minute. So this will generate a browse button that when the user clicks it, brings up a file dialog box. And it's important that the name here matches our model property name exactly. So when we save it, our form will now show the image, but we get a browse button here. We need to do one more thing on this page. Whenever we create an HTML form that's going to do file uploads, we need to add some attribute to our form tag. So normally when we build a form, we usually include method and action. These are getting generated automatically up here in the begin form tag. If we view the source, right, we didn't have to specify the method or action. That HTML begin form method, it automatically generates these two attributes. You can see them in source. But when we want our form to also include file uploads, we have to add one more attribute to this list. We did it in our PHP class. Anybody remember what that attribute was? It was a while ago. Here would be the easy way to check. I'm not going to keep this tag, but if I want to see the helpers, if I type form, it's going to be in this list. What attribute have we used here?
ENC type.
Right, we need the ENC type, and we'll want to set it to which of these values. Right, whenever our form is including a file upload, we need that encoding type as multi-part form data. Now this function on line 12, begin form, this generates the form tag for us automatically. So we can just add some parameters right in here to include that encoding type. So there's actually 13 different versions of this method. So we're going to first put in the name of the action. Second one is the name of the controller, which is our store manager. The third parameter is we have to specify the method now, which is HTTP, sorry, it's form method.h.post. So we're going to run a post on the edit method in our store manager controller, and this is where we can set up the encoding type attribute. So everything inside of the brackets we need to add to our begin form method. Now if we refresh the page and look at the browser, it's going to have this third attribute that says encoding type equals multi-part form data. So now it can transfer a file from the user's computer to the server. Without that attribute, file uploads, we don't get an error, it just all gets ignored. The file never gets transferred, nothing gets uploaded. So we're going to need to do a similar thing on our create view. We'll get it working on this page. Once it works, we'll need to add similar attributes into the view and similar code into the controller. So we'll save that. And now we're going to need to write some code on our post method to actually process and save the file upload into content images. So I grabbed a couple of album covers here that we can use. I grabbed the album covers for these two AC/DC albums that right now just show the placeholder. So in week 6, if you download these two items, just save them to that working folder that we just created. So if we just save those images, so inside of the working folder you just made, you can save it. So what we want to do is we want to replace the placeholder image with the actual correct album covers. So when we go and click on that album, we see the proper cover image. Now this isn't going to work yet. Our form looks good. It looks like this is going to work, but right now this file isn't going to get saved because we haven't written any code on the server to actually process that new file. So let's go back to our store manager controller. We can actually see all the methods here. There's a little drop down at the top. You can scroll through it. But what we want is this edit method, the first one. The second one is when we're form. The first version is when we're processing an update. So click that one, and it takes us down to the post for store manager /edit. So when we created our little file upload box, we had to give it a name of album art URL, and I said I would explain why. Well, I need to explain why. We give it a name, and in our controller, the scaffold code, it binds a field called album art URL. So that means this code is already looking for a field with that name because it matches one of the columns in the database. So we need to have an input on our form with the exact same name, because it will automatically take whatever values in that field and stick it in that column in the database when it saves. So it's not like PHP where we would manually have to map every input to a specific column. We can just call bind, and here's the list of field names that match our database table. So in here, here's the code that the scaffolding writes to actually do the update. It says the state of our album object is modified, and when save changes gets executed, our database actually gets updated here. So before this happens, we want to save the file. So we will save new album cover if there is one. We're going to check the request, and the request has a files object. So if some file has been uploaded as part of the HTTP post request, we'll have that file in this request.files collection. So this is an array of files. So we could have multiple browse buttons, and we could let the user upload as many files as we wanted to allow them. In this case, we only have one. So request.file0 is going to be the first and only file uploaded. We're going to make sure our file has a name and that the size of the file isn't 0. Our file has a name and it's bigger than 1 byte. We want to save it. Now, in order to save it, we need to know the full directory file path starting with the drive letter. We don't want to hard code our path, though. We want that path to be dynamic. Why don't we want to hard code the file path? Starting from the drive letter.
Because this application will work on remote computers.
Right, because we might upload it to the web server. Well, the physical file path is going to be different. So if we use server.map path, that gives us the full Windows file path dynamically. So we can run this application in one directory on our laptop for development, and it can still run on another directory on Azure, and it's going to work fine. So in that case, we want, this is going to be the path of where we want to copy that image file. And then we just call save as and specify where to save the file. But this is not a virtual path. This is an actual physical directory path. And then we'll include path as part of the file name. But otherwise, it's going to save the image name without the path. So we're going to check for a file, make sure it has a name, make sure it has a length. We're going to save it into the content images folder, and then we're going to add on /content/images with a slash before we save that to the database. So now we should be able to build and try this out. We should be able to browse to a different image file, upload it, and if we go back in, that placeholder.gif file should be replaced with the proper album cover. If this works, we're going to just literally copy and paste that exact if statement, that exact code into the create method as well. And we'll add a browse button there. So we can also upload a cover image as we're adding a new album. So I'll refresh. So now I can browse. And I'll go into my working folder where I downloaded those album covers. And we'll try and upload. So now when we go back to edit again, it's replaced that image. So I should be able to do the same with my other AC/DC album. I also gave you the art for this one. Which we can replace. So now this is going to be much more useful to whoever's managing this application. But by default, because the files are just listed as strings in the database, the scaffolding just generates a text box, which isn't very helpful if what we really want is to give our users a file upload. We've got to take out what the scaffolding gives us and replace it with something more useful. So we should probably make this same change on our create. Because again, the scaffold just gives us a text box. It's not going to be helpful for somebody. So we want to add the same browse button. We need to modify the begin form method, and we need that same code in our controller. So open up your Store Manager Create view. We're going to modify our begin form tag. This is exactly the same as edit, except instead of calling the edit method, we're calling the create method. We're still doing a post in the Store Manager, and we're adding the encoding type. So this is exactly what was on edit, except the word we're calling the method here changes from edit to create. Once you've done this, scroll down to the text box for the album art URL and the validator and delete those things and replace them with an input type equals file. We don't need to display the image on this page because when the user's filling out the form, we don't have a record to display yet. They're creating a brand new one. So we'll come down here. It's lines 54 and 55. And we can just delete those lines and replace them that'll generate the browse button instead of a text box. So we don't need an if statement. We don't need an image tag to be displayed here. So we can save those changes, and we should see the browse button now. Which works. The code in our controller is identical. So we can copy this whole section we added in the edit, copy it to the create post method. So everything here that checks if we have a new file, and if so, saves it. So we'll just copy that section, and I'll pick my create album method. That's the post version. And again, before we add a new album, we'll save any file that was uploaded along with it. We don't have to make any changes to that section at all, straight copy paste. And now if I build the solution, we can try this. I put one more album cover up on Blackboard for you, which we can download, and we can try creating a new album and make sure that our file upload works on the new album as well. So if you go back to Blackboard, there's one more cover here. It says Vitalogy cover. So save that to your working folder. So now if we go to create a new album, we could pick, I don't know, pick rock. And the artist is Pearl Jam, and the title I can't pronounce, put in the price. And then we can browse and pick that album cover. And hopefully when we create it, it will save the album properly and include the cover. Now I can search for that album to find it easily. And when I go to edit, it included, when we save that new album, it included our album cover.
Now I'm getting an error on my create page. Object reference not set to an instance of an object.
Okay, so my guess is that perhaps, do you have that attribute spelled exactly that way? It's looking for an input field called album art URL, spelled that way.
Yep.
Okay. That if statement doesn't exist on our create page. That's only on the edit page for an existing record. Can you load the form? You just can't submit it, or the error happens when you try to load the form?
So sorry, it's just the input tag that we're using?
Yep.
Okay.
It's just the input tag. So now we can add an album cover both when we're creating a new album or when we're editing. So we're getting there with these views. We still need to deal with these drop downs that they both have that are unordered, well, they're ordered by ID. We should fix the code that populates the drop downs on both these forms so that these are in order. So if I go back to my store manager controller, so it's actually using the view bag to pass in the list of artists and list of genres. But these items aren't sorted. So this is my line 60 and 61 here, my get create. We can simply add an order by on here. So for our artists, we can order by we want to order by the artist name. Genres. We want to order by the genre name. So if we do that in our create, on our form, those drop downs should be sorted. We want to do the same thing on our get method for get edit. We're going to add those exact same sorting clauses. So we'll add them here on create. And if I click edit with an ID, we have almost the exact same code here. So let's sort those as well. Order the artist list by artist name. And order the genre list by genre name. And we'll build that change. And now we should be able to try both of those views and click on all the drop downs, and they should all be sorted alphabetically. So I'll refresh my edit view, we'll check the drop downs, and then I'll try my create view. So now on edit, genre sorted alphabetically. And so is artist. And if we go to create, again, all our lists are sorted alphabetically. So the scaffolding's not smart enough to do this for us. It will always sort these lists based on the primary key. So we're going to want to override that to make our forms easier to use. So all we added was this little section here on both edit and create. Order those lists in a way that makes more sense. Questions?
When we create the files or the albums, should we have like I guess something else to put default for that like placeholder one if they don't upload the
You mean on the edit? Well, sorry, in the controller or in the view?
Create, controller. If they don't put an image up for the album, will it go to the default album cover or?
Good question. No, it won't do anything right now. So we could hard code that. Yes, we could put in an else. That's not a bad idea. Now, we don't need to save that file because it's already there, but we could set this. That's not a bad idea, Josh. So we could say, I guess it would go in here. Actually, maybe what we want to do is just here set the placeholder in case there is no upload. So we could do this, album dot. Set it at default it to our placeholder, and then if a file's been uploaded, overwrite that value with whatever it's called. We could even, the other option, the other way of doing it is we could actually set a default value in the database. So in SQL Server, if I went into my table, we could also set it up in here if you wanted. So we can set up a default. So if I went into my albums table, we don't need to do both. Either one of these would work. So if I copied that value, it's not too speedy. So in my album art URL, oh, there actually is a default value already here in the script I gave you. It already writes that value in. I didn't realize it was there. So that line, this line really isn't necessary because we've set it in the database. So there's no way to create an album without it. But that's a good idea. I didn't realize it in the database, so that's how we could do it. Set up a default, and then if we found that a user uploaded a file, overwrite the default. Okay. It's a good question. So I'll keep this line here, not really necessary because our database is already taking care of that.
The two album covers have the same name.
Right now, one would overwrite the other. So the other thing we could do, we could generate a globally unique ID and attach it on if we wanted to. We could do it that way. I won't worry about doing that for now, but we could. Any other questions? We've pretty much made all the changes, or almost all the changes we need to make through the views and controllers. So we'll take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 4:05, and we're going to make, we still need to deal with these labels, which aren't very good. And we also want to deal with the formatting of our price. So those are things that we can actually set up through our model. So that's what we'll do in the last section of class. We'll take a break here.